when you can start to see that there are outside forces that have influenced your decision making for you to be the way you are, you can start to then go, no, I disagree with that one. I'm going to get rid of that.
Hey, I'm Megs, and welcome to the Free to Be You podcast. I am an identity and alignment coach who is passionate about helping you move into the second chapter of your life as the freest, most self-expressed version of who you really are. If there's one thing I know for sure, it's that when you decide to go on this journey and rediscover you, you are going to need people around you who are going to encourage you to keep moving forward and keep choosing yourself. I have created a free community of women who are doing just that. It's called the Freed to Rediscover You group. It's over on Facebook. The link is in the show notes below this episode. I would love to see you there. I would love to support you on your journey to moving through self-abandonment and into full self-expression. My guest today is Renee Shea. She is a personal brand coach and facilitator dedicated to empowering women, especially those from diverse backgrounds, to become influential leaders in their respective fields. With over 20 years of experience delivering impactful programs for private and public sector organizations, Renee has made it her mission to create a more inclusive and equitable workplace where every woman's voice is heard and valued. Renee is deeply committed to fostering an inclusive environment where all women can thrive. By creating spaces that celebrate diversity, she ensures that every woman, regardless of her background, feels empowered, supported, and equipped to pursue her aspirations and make a meaningful impact. Renee, welcome to the Freed to Be You podcast. I'm so pumped to have you here because we're so aligned in how we view the world and what we think is important, but we serve our audiences in very different ways. And I'm really looking forward to bringing that together and sharing some values. So thank you for being here.
Totally welcome. It's going to be lots of fun.
Always. And if you can see Renee right now, she has these amazing pink glasses, which it's like, I love that you are so colorful and self-expressed because that's one of the things that I'm all about. And when you do head over and check Renee out, you will notice that there is nothing bland about you, my girl.
No, there is a lot of color, Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about like who you are, which I think is a bigger question than most people give an answer to, and sort of what you do in your own words.
In my own words. So I am a loud, creative soul who is very focused on, I guess, building self-love, self-compassion, and then meaning in people's lives. So as an essence, that's who I am. In a tangible sense, I am a coach. I work with women, particularly in finding and developing their personal brand. And now personal brand is a kind of a phrase that some people have a really good relationship with and other people not so much so. But it's all to me about being able to understand who you are at core, but then being able to bring that forward and into the work that you do, whether that's for a company or for yourself or in any way that you show up and take place and take up space in the world. That brand is a true and authentic essence of who you are. So that's kind of who I am and what I do.
I love that. I know you do so much more than that because you're also a mum of two, as your website says, cuter than our kids. I loved that when I read it. Totally. I was like, oh, you're so cheeky. That's so funny. But you have two amazing kiddos and you also do like photography. There's so many ways that you help people express themselves authentically. Yes. So I love that you've got a well-rounded way of bringing that to life. But what I would really love to know a little bit about is your story, because if there's anything I know from the people that connect with my show is that we go on a journey to kind of figure out what we're going to be when we grow up. And sometimes it takes a long time to figure that out. But we get this second chance when our kids get a little bit older to kind of reinvent ourselves or rediscover those things that we put aside when we're bringing up our children, and we get to kind of put ourselves out there afresh, which is where you kind of come in and and really help people do that in a strategic way, obviously with a brand. But what's your journey to kind of reach what you're doing that could really be inspiring to people?
And it's a really, like everybody's, is a really twisty turny kind of way. I worked for a lot of years in learning and development and in HR. I've got, an academic background in that. I've got a professional and corporate background in that. And that's kind of where I expected I would be. I kind of started out hoping that I was going to save the world and work in international development. And then I realized that probably was a little less likely. And saving people's day by helping them have a workplace and an experience at work seemed to be the next kind of best thing. I would say also in line with this is I was partnered young. I married my, university sweetheart, I guess you could say. And so we were together for a really long time. And what happened is, and as life is oftentimes gives you, is these journeys that are intertwined in the many ways that you show up. And it just so happened that my marriage, when it ended, happened at a time when a budding photography business that I was building started to take shape. And so it was a really interesting combination, or a really interesting time for me now as I reflect back, because it was a strong, I'd like to say nudge, but really it was like a trip and push down the discovery of yourself and who you are, and that kind of process. Because as I left a relationship that I'd been in for over 20 years, I'm like, well, who the heck am I? At the same time, I've got kids that are now past the toddler. They're getting into the school years. And I'm trying to start this business that is something that is completely different to what I've done in the past, and required me to start showing up online in a way that I had never done before. So all of these three kind of life things just not clash in a bad way, but combusted at once and started this journey for me. And I've subsequently found that a lot of my clients that I've worked with in that branding space have kind of similar stories. They get to a point, and it's not necessarily relationship breakdowns or anything like that, but they get to a certain point in their career and they're like, hang on a minute, this isn't working right. And I need to not start again, but I need to have a really good hard look at what's going on. And I guess that's how I got into this, was my own process. And then seeing clients do the same thing and going, oh, hang on, I'm not the only one doing this. This is big and this is impactful for folks.
So good. And you know what? I told you we were aligned, but I'm listening to you nodding. And I'm like, you've already heard my story because we've had a chat already. But yeah, gosh, we're so alike. And we're not alone. And that's why I wanted you to share it, because there's so many people that are going to resonate with that and realize that that feeling of realizing that you're not alone in your journey, it can sometimes be the catalyst for people to go, well, if she can do it, I can do it. And if she can do it, I can do it. And it's not just women either, but obviously, men go through a similar thing. But for you and I, we resonate with women because we are women. But we need to understand that we're not alone in this journey, and that we can go on that journey to rediscover what's important. And then we can do something with that, more importantly. Not just kind of, have that fluffy experience, but then, okay, well, now what? What am I going to do with that? Because it's a never ending journey. We're always going to be growing and changing and reflecting. And most people either don't do it or are too scared to take that next step to actually create something else.
Yeah. And I think it's somewhat, it's typical, and, it makes me a bit melancholy, because it's oftentimes these, and I don't want to call traumatic or these big life moments that take us to the point where we start reflecting and we start thinking about who we are outside of all of the hats that we wear. And it's like, what a shame. Like, if I look at my daughter now, who's 11, and I go, I don't want you to have to get to the time you're 40 before you start the process of actually understanding who you are. And I certainly don't want it to be because there's some big crap thing that goes on in your life before you decide you're worth thinking about and spending time getting to know. So I think for me, one of the things that I'm particularly passionate about is, yes, my clients are at a certain age, and I also like to talk with them about the fact that it is our responsibility almost to be the mentor to the younger women in our lives to show that they aren't alone in that journey, so that they don't get to that point where they're 40 plus and go, oh, so other people deal with this too, and maybe I could learn from someone else. I feel very strongly that that's part of my role, is to go, no, I'm here for you with these younger women around me to step them through that process, even if it's just as a role model or mentor, because I don't want them to get to that age. I want them to do this work younger, so that I don't get the grey hair. Well, I'll get the grey hair, but that'll happen eventually. You know what I
mean? Hey, we can cover that up. It's all good. I totally agree. And so what's your sort of, if someone comes to you and they're wanting to, build that personal brand and put themselves out there and be more visible, like, how do you help someone figure that out? Like, what would be the first thing you would do with them?
So I have a method that I've pretty much taken all my clients through, and it's broadly 4 steps, and I call it RISE, because that's just the process that we want to do with our work, right? We want to rise, and we want to rise and elevate ourselves and our work and the impact that we're trying to make. Now, the first step that I generally work with people through is about really recognizing yourself. And that's where the R comes in. And so that's, what are your strengths? Not just the skills that you've learned in your work in the past, but what are your personality strengths? And we can geek out on personality profiles like the Enneagram and the Myers-Briggs. And we really get in and go, these are the things that it's just you naturally being you and how you shine when you're doing that. We have a process which is sometimes kind of a bit confronting, where we also do in HR terms, it would be a 360 performance review. But for me, it's like where we go out and we talk to different people in your lives, whether they're friends and family, whether they're clients that you've got or colleagues. And we start to get feedback back about who you are and how you show up to them. So it's a really deep reflective process about recognizing your strengths and what you're good at doing. Because when we're looking at a personal brand, particularly in relation to work, the place where it is you doing the work that you love and where other people see you shine, and not just how you do yourself, is where that branding juice really comes out, right? And so then we look at impact. Now, to me, and you have a look at a lot of work, is that greatest fulfillment in life and in work is when you are aligned to your purpose and you're living in accordance to your values. And so that's another piece of the puzzle that we find that we don't actually spend a lot of time reflecting on, is what our values are. And, in the space of avoid, we take on other people's. So it's really common that I might ask somebody, what are your values? And they'll sprout something back to me that might have been their parents, or that their partner believes in, or maybe it's what their work values are. And it takes a bit of time to go back and unpack it all to the point where we can go, no, this is what I believe in. And then when we know what that is, we start to work on and bring about, what is your purpose then? How are we going to take what you have as your skill sets, what we've recognized as your skills and your strengths, and how are we going to align that with the purpose and what matters to you? And that's where we create a really strong foundation then of what the brand should be. Not what we think it should be in terms of, this is what the cool kids are doing, but this is the authentic side of who I am and how I show up. And this is what I'm bringing. So that's the R and the I of the process that I go through. And then we do a process which is about identifying your signature service and then expressing that brand. And, as a photographer, this is how I started this work, was largely working with women who were trying to, have photos for their social media, for websites. And so we look at color psychology and all of that kind of stuff to create a brand guideline that helps them, or a playbook, I guess is probably even better, to help them express the authenticity and the authentic position that they've got, that we've done that work through. So it's a big chunky process. There's oftentimes lots of tears, lots of self-reflection and aha moments, but it's a really beautiful process too in helping people not only have the tangible outcomes, like, yep, this is what I'm going to do next week for my business, but also go, man, I do matter in what I'm working towards. And I think that's a really important and powerful step.
Gosh, I love that. I love the RISE acronym too. I'm a big acronym girl. Love it. And on that, we actually have the same Myers-Briggs profile. So I am also in ENFP without the J, just the P. But yeah, how interesting is that?
I've decided that I've flipped as I've gotten older. My J's become more P as I've less time in corporate world.
Yeah, true. I would die in corporate world. I'm just going to tell you, like I tried it for 6 months and that's as long as I lasted. I was like, get me out of here. I am much better. I'm too much of a free spirit for that. But yeah, I totally hear you. But I love what you just said there. That process about creating a personal brand is so similar to what I do in terms of helping someone create a life, because we have so many hats that we wear and we do need to be aligned in all of those areas. And it's one thing to kind of uncover it all and put a brand on it and all of that. And I love how you then go on to help them create something out of that, because it's the same in life. If we can do all this discovery work, but if we don't learn how to then align those things that are important to us in our life, then it's just another process that, it was just another thing that we did, and we move on and we go back to eventually being the way that we were. What true transformation, true change happens through transformation. And you're right. Sometimes it is painful and confronting, because that's the breakdown. And we have to have that breakdown in order to kind of break through and get true freedom on the other side. And yeah, I love that.
And I think our work takes up so much of our life.
Yeah.
And, one of the sad things I find is how many times we associate or we identify with our profession. And, it's only a part of who we are. It's just like going, I'm a mother, it's only part of who I am. Yet at the same time, we get so much identity from the work that we do. And if that work that we do, and it's a really funny place, right? Because, and we've talked about this, you and I, that identity piece, that self-awareness piece, right? It's a big, huge, life-changing piece. And you talk about that, and yet in the same breath, I can talk to you about career plans, which seems like a really kind of, I don't know, what's the word? Not shallow, but light outcome. Do you know what I mean? So we've got this really big, deep, juicy work where it comes to this identity piece, and then this really almost flippant piece at the top about work. And I know that that if we can get those two things in alignment, though, it's like they magnify each other. And then you are showing up so much more as yourself in life. And then when you're showing up much more as yourself in your work just grows. But it's like this funny little balance between the two. And sometimes that they do clash, because we have an opinion of how we should be over here and how we should be over here. And when the two of them merge, it can be a little bit, I don't know, friction sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, isn't it ever? Though, I found personally that when those two things merge, as much as there can be friction from the people that aren't used to that version of you, it's so much freer. It's like the ultimate when you don't have to wear different hats, and you can just be you in every area without having to pretend, without having to have some filter, because obviously we'll probably show up a little bit different for our kids, because we need to, that's a different hat, but we still get to be us. So we learn how to be us in the different areas of our life without having to pretend and without having to not be authentic. So I love what you're saying there. And I think that it's kind of leads me on to my next point, which is what's one of the sort of biggest obstacles either that you've had or that your clients have when they've done that work and then they go to put themselves out there, step into that new version? Like, what's some of the things that you see happen or have people have had to overcome?
Yeah, there's a couple of different things. If I think the majority of my clients, the step is the actual putting themselves out there. It's I'm going to let the world, like, I'm okay, I've done this work. I know who I am now. I feel good about that, but now I've got to let the world see. There is definitely a courage that is required in that step. And that step it's one of those trust falls, right? You've got to go, if this doesn't, it's like you're saying, there are definitely people who might get a bit of rub about the way that people show up differently now, but it's going to be okay. And we are so conditioned to believe that we have to play small, that we have to fit in and not ruffle feathers, that we have to do what has always been done, that it's actually breaking through that conditioning that's the hard part. It's not actually the reaction of people around you, but it's the friction is that breaking through the conditioning about how we are taught that we should behave. And that's where people get tripped up. And we all do it. Like, again, completely normal. There's no doubt about that. And I find myself practicing showing up as myself. And I have to put it that way because there are times when I don't do it. You fall into old habits and patterns. So I've been practicing showing up as myself for a long while now. And I still find times when I'm like, ugh, I don't know how I should behave in this scenario. And oftentimes that is in environments where I'm not familiar. And I'm a big person. I've got color and opinions, and I'm expressive. And so but I'm also incredibly aware of that and how that in some circumstances is not perceived the way that is professional or is appealing or whatever else. And so I've got to really push myself. And that's why I say it's about courage, because it's just practice. You got to push through it anyway.
Yeah. And I'm something that as you were saying that came up for me. And that is like, I've been told so many times over the last few years in particular, but over the years, that I'm too much. Definitely since I've been on this journey of like being, self-expressed, and it's almost like you shed a layer and there's this new, there's this new presence that you have, and then you've got to kind of learn how to wear it, which it sucks, right? Because it should be easy, but it's more about what you're getting, the feedback that you're getting back, isn't it? And so you have to fight that feedback. And do you know what I've come to realize, Renee, is that I'm not for everybody. And you know what? I am freaking okay with that. It's totally fine, because you can't serve the whole world and not everyone can like you. And for a really long time in my life, I wanted everyone to like me. I didn't want to come across as somebody who was too much, or that was the journey that I was on. And so I had to let go of that. So I feel like that sometimes what happens is we put ourselves out there and then we get this feedback that we don't like. But it's actually serving us if we can view it as this is what has to happen in order for us to find our people, in order for us to find the spaces that we're supposed to be in that are made for us. In order to attract those things, we actually have to shed the things that aren't for us.
Absolutely. And I would argue that we fear repercussion more than there actually is one. We worry more about what the feedback is going to be than what the feedback actually is. Yeah, there is a handful of people, but nowhere near the degree to which we hold ourselves back by the fear of what that will be. I think it's a really interesting thing too, is that I have in my journey, and I'm thinking now about a couple of different roles I was in corporately, right? And that I was in a work environment in particular that was very traditional, very structured, very bureaucratic, very formal. And I'm not that, right? Especially as I'm starting to lean into that more and more. And so I was particularly concerned about showing up in that space in that way. But what I quickly came to learn is that it actually was really valued, because the environment was so one way, that difference of opinion, the difference of perception and perspective and the different forms of thinking was really valued because they were stuck. And I think this is one of the things that I would really like to try and reinforce, is that it is, again, that the conditioning and the barrier that we put ourselves in. And yes, absolutely, I'm the biggest one who's going to say that society also puts us in that position. But we don't know what's on the other side. We assume that we do. And it's usually nowhere near as bad as what we think it's going to be. Nowhere near.
Yeah, so true. And that perceived threat, like that's normal. right? Because that's what keeps us, that's that inner voice that keeps us safe, stops us from supposedly making a fool of ourselves. But you know what? At the end of the day, we got to push through that. And sometimes we got to screw up it's like 2 steps forward to try things on and have a go, put ourselves out there and see what fits and see where we're supposed to be. And the momentum that comes with that, that's the thing that I really love about too, is that the momentum that comes with continuing to show up authentically, you're going to get where you want to go so much faster than if you hold back, because that feedback serves you. So what's some of the feedback that you've had, as you've started, you mentioned before about sort of moving into your new business in that time. And then you mentioned now, like being in that corporate space and how you were sort of worried about how that would show up. Like what's some of the feedback that you got that you've overcome?
Look, I think for me, there's 2 things that jump out at me. One is that and it's more to do with that living then in alignment with my values and what's important to me, as opposed to how I show up. And that was, again, in a corporate work environment, right? Becoming very unhappy because of the fact that I was working in an organization that did not align with my values. Now, this one here is an interesting one because there's nothing wrong with the organization. There's nothing wrong with the work. There's nothing wrong with me in it, right? But there's this assumption when we're not happy at work, that it has to be something wrong with somebody, whether it's you or whether it's a team or whatever. And it's not necessarily the case. It's just a misalignment. And I think in younger times, it would have taken me a whole lot longer to work out that that's what the problem was. And I think in my younger version of myself would have been sitting there going, why am I so bad at this job? Why am I so unhappy at this job? What do I need to do differently? What's the problem with me? How do I need to change my behaviors in order to do better in this job? And that's the conditioning that we have as that young person, is that it's our role to shapeshift to fit into what's suitable. But reality was there was nothing wrong with me in this role. There was nothing wrong with the people who I was working with either. It was just that there was a misalignment. And I think that's why this knowing yourself and being sure of who you are is really valuable in these kind of contexts, because it's freeing, like you've said, but it also allows you not to place blame where blames are not necessary. You can then make an intentional decision to change whatever component of your life that needs to be changed without holding a grudge and without going, there was a problem with me or a problem with them. And I think that's a very powerful way to live your life without having that victim, or do you know what I mean? It's a much stronger way to show up.
I love that. So true. And you know me, I'm all about alignment. So I'm like,
yeah, exactly.
Yes, preach it, sister. And you know, the thing is that I love that piece you just said there about like it removes the opportunity to blame, because being in a space that you're not happy, it's our responsibility to change it, but we don't have to point fingers in order to make that change. We just get to change. Like that's the really beautiful thing about being human, is that we have the ability to choose. We have the conscious awareness to make a new choice, and to continuously choose something that makes you feel crap or makes you feel bad over and over and over again. That's on us. And that's where I think you mentioned the courage piece before. Like that's a massive part of my vision, is like giving people the courage and the permission to take themselves on, because it's not easy to make that new choice. And usually it's because we feel like we have to either blame ourselves or blame someone else. And if we just remove that piece altogether and just call it for what it is, and then just make a new choice, just like step over it like a pebble on the road. I love the way you describe that.
Yeah. And I think I can't go past these conversations without pointing out that the reasons why we think the way we do, there's reasons, right? We don't just spontaneously come up with these ideas that this is my fault or this is a bigger challenge than it actually is, right? We exist, we live, breathe, swim, exist in a culture. that has got influences that are coming at us constantly. Now, if we think of, gender, we think of color, we think of, as in race, we think of our wealth and privilege, we think of where we live. There are so many, our religions, faith backgrounds, all of these things, right? They all form part of a really powerful net, I guess, of instruction about how we should behave. And as women, that net is even thicker than others. And so one of the things that I found most powerful in that process was going that, yes, because, I've always been the kind of person who's gone, oh, I'm just a shy person, or I'm just not a confident person. And that's just my fault. It's my fault that I'm not a confident person. And so I can't blame that person or that person or that person because it's my doing. Where when you can start to see that there are outside forces that have influenced your decision-making for you to be the way you are, you can start to then, again, for me, it's all about personal power, right? You can start to then go, no, I disagree with that one. I'm going to get rid of that. But if you don't acknowledge that this culture and the world that we live in is actually putting influence on what you think about yourself, not just everybody else around you, but yourself, then you're only seeing part of that process. And yes, your responsibility is the one to break it down. Just because they, as in the outside influences, have put that on you. It's not their responsibility to get rid of it. It's totally yours.
Yeah.
But if you can see where these things come from, then it makes it a whole lot easier to start to peel off those layers so that you can come through. And I think a lot of times we just blame, oh, I've got a bad mindset for this. I've got a bad, self-confidence when it comes to this or whatever else. There's nothing wrong with you. It's one of those things you can see I can get cranky. You are enough, right? There is nothing wrong with you. You have been taught certain behaviors. You've been taught to believe things. And until you start to actively question those lessons, that's when you can get rid of it. That's when you can use your affirmations to change the way that you're thinking. But you can affirmation yourself into next week, and it's not going to make a difference if you don't see why you're thinking this, if you don't see why you're believing this. And it's part, to me, it's part of that conversation that gets missed way too often because it's invisible. Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I was like nodding furiously. Like I so agree.
Yeah.
So agree. And that starts at such a young age. We're so impressionable when we're children, and also when we're teenagers. I mentioned before about not having to wait until we're older to do this work. And oh my gosh, I've said this on a couple of interviews recently, where if I knew what I know about myself what I know now, when I was 20, I would have made very different choices. However, big however, I also wouldn't change anything because what has happened has made me who I am now. So there's this kind of big loop that we go on in this work where we can't, like, how do you make sense of that? And that's where people like you and I can really help people to get off of that merry-go-round of, trying to figure it out on their own. Sometimes you need that mirror to be able to reflect back what we're not seeing, because it isn't visible. It isn't visible at all, but it certainly makes up part of who we are. So I love that. I think that was a really good kind of bring it home rant. So I love a good rant. So yeah, that was so powerful. Thank you, Renee. So what I would really love for you to do now is, if you're listening to this and you've resonated with what Renee has said and you feel like maybe you want to put yourself out there and you're ready to do something more in terms of your personal brand, where can people get in touch with you? What's the best way for someone to reach out?
Sure. So I spend way too much time on Instagram. Basically, it is, and so on Instagram, you can find me at Renee Shea _AU. So that's RENEESHEA. And on my website is reneeshea.com.au.
So just you. I love it. I'm going to put all that in the show notes anyway, so you can go and click on that easily and find Renee. But I definitely feel like we speak the same language. I also spend guilty way too much time on Instagram. So I know we're always seeing each other there and cheering each other on. So I love that. And thank you for bringing this conversation to my audience. I know that it's going to resonate. I know I'll be popping into your little community there at some point in the future as well. So I love that we've got to do this, because I think what's really amazing about podcasting is being able to showcase each other and collaborate in a way that gets this message out there more, and it gets it out there louder. And like we said, there are going to be people that resonate with different people. And so why not do it together? It's so good. And we're so aligned in what we say and what we think. So it's been an absolute pleasure to have you, Renee. So thank you for being on the show today.
Oh, you're quite welcome. And thank you for having it. Let me rant.
You can rant on my show anytime. That's what I'm here to do. But the other thing I'm here to do is to give you, if you're listening, full permission to take that courage and step into being the real you, because this is not a dress rehearsal. This is the real deal. It's the final act, the only act. So now is the time to get out there and rediscover who you are and live life to the fullest. So until next time, if you've resonated with this and you think someone would love to hear it, I'd love for you to share it. Please leave a comment underneath if there's something that's on your heart. We'd love to hear it. And until next time, I will see you on the next show.